Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. And today I thought I would talk to you about what I consider to be the five most important steps to becoming a genealogical speaker. If you've got dreams of being a genealogical lecturer, I'm going to try to help you do that. So you definitely want to stick around and stay tuned because I'm going to be sharing my top tips for not only becoming a genealogy lecturer, but a successful one and one who gets paid for it. I love lecturing, and I actually love making money lecturing. I sometimes think that I never should have become a genealogy publisher and I just should have become a genealogy lecturer. But I recognize that that's contrary to what I've said about my stool with five legs. If you haven't heard about that, there are several videos that I'll put in the description that talk about what you need to do to become a professional genealogist. And being a lecturer is one of them. Being an educator is another one, and you do that through lecturing. And in today's environment, we in fact have multiple opportunities to lecture, not only in person, but in hybrid situations and also in virtual situations. So the opportunity for lecturing is really great compared to what it was before COVID. As I said, lecturing is one of those five legs of that stool, and it can be a great source of income. And there's just no way that you can't make money lecturing if you do the right things. And there's no way that you can't reuse your lectures over time with modifications so people don't have a sense that you're stale. So let's get into my top tips. I think the first tip is never talk about something that you don't know anything about because you'll just come up short. So you want to become, I think expert's the wrong word, the unknown drip of water under pressure, but I think you want to be competent in the topic that you're talking about. In my mind, you have to know a topic so well that you're willing to stand up in front of people and talk about it with confidence and enthusiasm. If you're known as a boring speaker, they're not going to select you. If you speak with confidence and enthusiasm, you are going to get selected again and again to speak because people enjoy enthusiasm. Actually, I sometimes think they enjoy enthusiasm more than they enjoy competence, but that's an entirely different story. But you need to be able to stand up after your lecture and answer questions. You also need to know when to say, I don't know, but if you'll send me an email, I'll get back to you on it. Those kind of things. Don't ever lie. Don't ever come up with a fake answer unless you do what I do, and that's I come up with the answer that I think is probably appropriate. And then I say, I just made that up. Does that sound right to you? So that they know that it may not be 100% correct, but you need to become the individual that people would think about if it was on that subject. So today, people think about me for military records. Unfortunately, they think about me for military records on nauseam where I have other skills. You want to try not to get too niched or niched, depending on where you're from, but you want to become extremely competent, be able to talk with confidence, and especially be able to talk with enthusiasm. If you have fears about standing up in front of people and talking about your topic, my recommendation is that you practice more and you practice with your friends. The only way that you're going to get to speak is if you propose. And this is tip number 2. Tip number 1 was become the expert. Tip number 2 is you've got to propose. You have to propose talks to get booked. Otherwise, no one is going to know what you have to talk about. I recommend that you start small with your local genealogy society, or if you're in the Association of Professional Genealogists, which I highly recommend, your chapter, your local chapter, or the Writers SIG or the Forensic SIG. Those people in APG, your peers, they want to see you succeed. And then once you have some experience with your friends, you can start working your way up in the chain. Now, did that happen to me? No. What happened to me is somebody got sick at a national conference. I was on the conference committee and I begged, got on my knees, begged some more, got on my knees some more, and finally They let me speak. And so my first lecture was at a national conference. And then I just took off from there. Because once you've been to a national conference, you have some sort of name recognition when it comes to time to propose. So you want to be sure that you propose. Now, where do you look in order to find where you can propose? I use two things. I belong to the Genealogical Speakers Guild. I recommend that if you're going to be a speaker and take this seriously, that you join the guild, because it's one place that people look for speakers. And you can put your list of lectures there, and you can just refer the conference chairman to your list of lectures if they're coming to you and saying, what do you speak about? That kind of thing. You want to get to the point where people come to you and say to you, what do you speak about? Rather than, I want you to speak about a specific subject, because that means that you've reached, well, not the pinnacle, but you've reached this sense of people see you're more than a one-trick pony. The other place I look is Conference Keeper. Conference Keeper is free. Genealogical Speakers Guild is not. But Conference Keeper, I at least check once a month to see what proposals there are out there. And if I go there now, I see that I could present a proposal today for the Utah Genealogical Association, and I may do that. And then there's also a call for presentations for the Association of Professional Genealogists, call for webinar proposals that's due on January 15th. I also, I've recommended Genealogical Speakers Guild, I've recommended Conference Keeper, and I've mentioned APG. I also recommend that you join APG, because here's another opportunity for you to belong to groups that will look forward to your speaking. I'm currently the vice president of the Writers SIG, and I had to go find 11 speakers for 2025. Fortunately, I had help in doing that. People are always looking for speakers. You just want to be one of those speakers that they look for. There are also, if you go out to Conference Keeper, a whole bunch of other proposals out there, not just those two. One of the most important things that you can do, though, is follow the proposal process. In other words, each group has probably some unique way of doing proposals. They have their own contract. You might have a contract. They want the syllabus a week ahead of time, 2 months ahead of time, 6 months ahead of time. You need to follow their rules. And their rules are generally part of the contract, or they'll let you know when they want things. The best thing you can do is not be the guy who's always the last person to turn it in. You want to get it turned in before they have to ask for it. Now, does that always happen with me? No. Am I upset with myself when they have to ask? Sort of. I don't stay upset very long with myself. But most importantly, you want to make sure that you understand what the proposal process is. They may provide, as part of the contract, a matrix with dates in it and what's due on each date. I put those into my calendar. And I also keep the contracts close at hand so that I can review them. And I sort of sort them by due date. Something's due date, so I know what's going on. Remember, there are people looking for you to propose. You just need to find them. And the Speakers Guild and Conference Keeper are two ways to be able to do that very easily. I guess what I've really been talking about is my tip number 3, is to follow the rules of the organizer. If you get a reputation for not following the rules, they're not going to ask you. If you create the opportunity such that they have to do additional work, they may not ask you. Or when you do submit, they look at you and they go, this person didn't follow the rules last time. Why are they going to follow the rules this time? You want to be sure to meet all the deadlines they set. Now, have I ever always met every deadline? No. And it's embarrassing. It's unprofessional. So meet all the deadlines they set. Tip number 4 is don't get a reputation for speaking longer than you should. Recognize in most situations, there is a set time slot for you to speak. If you go over, first of all, there's no time for Q&A. And for me, Q&A is the most important time of the entire event because I actually learn what they learned, and I also learn what I also need to learn later on or to add to this based on the questions that they've asked. Did I miss something in my lecture? And this question brings it right in front of my face. But if you're over time, recognize that you're outside your slot and there's a speaker generally right after you that you're eating into their setup time if it's live, or you're eating into their time. And that is not professional. You don't want to get a reputation for speaking overtime. Of course, part of this tip number 4 is you also don't want to get a reputation for speaking under time. In other words, if they've contracted with you for 50 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes and you speak for 30 or 20, you have created a scenario where they're not going to ask you back, and you're going to get a reputation for being a person who doesn't follow the rules. My tip number 5 is keep your material fresh. Update your talks as necessary. For the love of God, don't give stale talks. First of all, you want to make sure that if someone has heard this talk before, that when they listen to it a second time, they walk away still with more information that they maybe had the first time. Now, it may be the same information, but you may have caveated it a little bit differently. I don't have a script. I don't speak from a script. And in my early career as a speaker, back in the day, I actually was not allowed to speak at a couple of places because I didn't memorize the script. Well, I didn't care about speaking at those places anyway. So if you're memorizing your script, not a good idea. I use the slides as talking points. So that means every time I give a talk, the talk is different. Now, I also, every time I give a talk, go through the talk before I'm going to give it, usually the day before, sometimes 2 days before, and then update the URLs, update the pieces. Now, I may have done that before I did the handout. Also, don't forget the handout is sent in a little bit earlier. So I check those things. When I do the handout, I make sure that everything is already copacetic with the talk. Many times, if it's a new talk, and I do propose talks I've never given before as part of my learning process. So there may be a subject that I'll propose that I actually have never given before, but I'm interested in learning that subject, and I will become an expert, probably in my own mind, on that subject in order to give that talk. The North Carolina Genealogical Society for the past few years has been coming to me and saying, we want you to give a talk on. And that's really interesting because I've given talks on things that I knew nothing about that all of a sudden I had to come up to speed on. Last year's talk was on indigenous records in North Carolina. And I'm not, although I've taught at IGHR in the Linda Geiger's Native American course, I'm really not an expert in indigenous records by any stretch, but now I know where the records are in North Carolina and the tribes of North Carolina, those kind of things. Before that, it was a talk on indentured servants. And right now I'm writing an article for the NGS magazine on indentured servants who are not convicts, based on a lot of the work that I did in creating first a lecture for North Carolina, indentured servants in North Carolina. Then for Legacy, I did a talk on indentured servants in the Mid-Atlantic. So you're able to rework things so they'll be in different places. A good example of how I've been able to do this is I did a talk on Legacy on how to use Fold 3. Well, I now have state talks on how to use Fold 3, that specific, one to North Carolina, one to South Carolina, and then one for Wisconsin, if I remember correctly. I've done several of them. The core thoughts are the same, but the material is different for each one of them. So be sure to update your talks as necessary. Don't become boring. Don't have people sense that that's the only thing he talks about. And, it's the same lecture day after day after day. You want to make sure that you can, in fact, don't forget that sense of confidence and that sense of enthusiasm. Boring talks just can't be enthusiastic because you're bored by it yourself. So there is this book out there called Professional Genealogy, Preparation, Practice, and Standards. And chapter 25 deals with the concept of genealogical lecturing. So this would be a good place to read the do's and don'ts for presentation slides. And then there also is chapter 26, which is genealogical teaching when you get into the sense of educator. Both those are worth looking at. Now, if you don't have professional genealogy, then you may have the precursor, professional genealogy, a manual for researchers, writers, editors, lecturers, and librarians. That there also is a chapter on classroom teaching that you might want to read. And then a chapter on lecturing that has multiple articles that talks about visual aids, preparing handouts, tips for published lectures, all those kind of things. I recommend that you own these books, especially if you're going to be a professional genealogist. But I also recommend that you read these chapters because they're going to help you to prepare for lecturing. There is the issue of how are you actually going to get yourself booked? I mean, it's all great for me to be able to talk about it, but how can you get yourself booked? I think you have to recognize that every program chair is different. But one key is that they recognize your name. You want to get to the point where people know your name. You also want to get to the point where you know who the program chairs are. Because if you know who the program chairs, you can talk to. Now, sometimes you're not going to be selected. You're just not. And you can't take that personally. Because if you do, it's not, the dopamine isn't going to fly. Because you're going to, how long do you want to hold on to this depression? And sometimes you'll even work with a society and spend some time, and then they don't select you. And that happens to me often. You just have to move forward. If you know the program chairs, you know what the program chairs are probably looking for based on the call for papers. If you want the program chairs to know who you are, they know who you are by your writing. They know who you are by your networking, most especially your networking. It's very hard to network in the webinar environment. This is why I like live conferences. It's because it's easier to network face-to-face in real life than it is to network face-to-face in a visual, virtual scenario. You want to try to attend as many physical live events as you can so that you can actually network people and people know who you are. That's just so important to getting things done. One of the things that you also need to have is equipment. Today, I haven't had to use my own digital projector since COVID, but I have a digital projector. In fact, I have two of them. One's just not suitable for large classrooms. It's more suitable for my Ford Transit van and showing movies. But anyway, you should have a digital projector, or at least propose to places that don't require that you bring a digital projector. But for the love of God, if the place requires that you bring a digital projector, be sure that you bring one. I've been in many situations where I've had to provide my digital projector at the request of the program chair to someone else because they didn't bring theirs with them. You also want to have your laptop computer with the necessary adapters to connect to a digital projector, which means basically you're going to need an adapter that allows you to go from your computer, whether it be USB 2 or USB 3 or something else, to HDMI, or depending on how old their system is, you want to check and make sure that you have the right adapter. I just travel with a whole set of adapters so that I know that it will always work for me. Make sure that you have the right equipment. Basically, it is the adapter, your laptop, your lecture on a flash drive in your pocket so that you can hand it to the tech so they can put it on their laptop or their system. You don't want to pull it off your machine and then hand it to them. You want to have it available if it's a live presentation. Always travel with a flash drive that contains your lecture. Actually, I travel with a flash drive that contains probably 50 to 100 lectures. I have never counted them, but there are a lot of them. And in a couple of circumstances, I've been able to step right up because something happened to a speaker where they got in an automobile accident or they were in an airplane that landed not in the airport it was supposed to land in. 9/11 comes to mind, where I was able to step up and give a lecture on the subject that they wanted. It wasn't exactly what the other person was talking about, of course. It's how I would have talked about it, but I had it available to me. So always travel with your lecture on a flash drive. And once you have done a few lectures, I would travel with all my lectures on a flash drive so that I would always be ready and available to fill in for somebody. If you get a reputation as being a person that can fill in, then it works pretty well. Now, the other thing that you might add to your equipment is a pointer or advancer. In the old days before COVID, I used an advancer a lot. I've probably had 5 or 6 of them. I probably left 2 or 3 of them behind on a podium over the years. I don't use them as much as I used to, but I really want to get back into it because if you don't use a pointer advancer, you're trapped behind the podium. Now, many times you're trapped behind the podium because it isn't a lavalier mic, it isn't a mobile mic. But if I've got a lavalier mic, I want to be able to roam. It's just my nature. And I can do that with a pointer or an advancer. So projector, adapter, pointer advancer, lectures on a drive. Remember, if they tell you to bring a digital projector, bring it. Don't forget. Once the lecture's done, don't throw it away. Don't let all that hard work go to waste. There are a couple of ways that I reuse my lecture material. My lecture material creates the basis for a lot of my YouTube videos. 2, my lectures provide a basis for writing NGS magazine articles, of which I've done several. One on Hessians, I've got one in the process right now for loyalists. I've done one on World War I, so you can convert those. I do it for NGS magazine because I'm supporting NGS, and it doesn't pay, but it's how you get your name out there. It's how you get your name out there. Right. Remember those 5 legs. One of them is lecturing. One of them is writing. You want to be able to reuse your lecture material as in an additional lecture somewhere, with modifications, of course, in articles. And then if you've done the lecture several times, you've written the articles, you then probably may have the basis for a book, whether it be a how-to book or a genealogy book or a history book or something. So I'm working on, and have been for years actually, working on how to research a Hessian soldier, for example, how to research a loyalist soldier. Do I work on them very much? No. But in the back of my head, I know that eventually I will write books on those subjects because I've talked about them a lot in lectures and written articles about them. So reuse is very important to your life as a professional genealogist. This has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy. Don't forget about those professional genealogy books. If you don't own them, you should. I wasn't going to bring this up, but I probably should say it, that if you have difficulty standing in front of people and talking, you can work on that. There are support groups for speaking. Toastmasters, I think, is one of the names. I haven't looked at that because as a kid, I knew I was going to become an Episcopal priest. So that meant every Sunday I had to write a sermon and stand up in front of people and do a sermon. So since I was a kid, I've known that I had to stand up in front of people. So I really don't have any umbrage associated with standing up in front of people. And I really don't understand why people have a problem standing up in front of people, because I never have, just to be fair. So, but there are groups, support groups, but one of them is your APG chapter. So you should belong to APG. You should belong, as a professional genealogist, you should belong to an APG chapter. APG chapters annually are looking for speakers. you should volunteer to speak. And that will get your foot in the door. That's probably the easiest way to get your foot in the door. As vice president of the Writers SIG, I asked for people in the SIG this year to, if they wanted to speak, and nobody stepped up. It's much more fun when people step up. Recognize that the people in these groups are your friends, they're your peers, and they want to see you to succeed. And I want to see you succeed. If you have comments about this talk or you have questions about speaking, put comments below. I'll do my best to answer them for you. But again, this has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy. Y'all have a great day.